the people who feel safe with rules of behavior and guidelines of agreements about how we're going to behave, and the people who are very dedicated to challenging authority and stretching things and not taking for granted that everybody's going to be good, or not even wanting everybody to be well behaved. So that's kind of interesting to see how that plays out. And both sides, it feels like both sides have something important to say, and that isn't about choosing sides, but about holding that conflict.
I mean, that kind of conflict is so common in,
Right.
I mean, even in activist groups, I've come across that often. But I'm wondering, what is a focusing oriented way of working with that might be different than other ways of one wins, one loses, or
Yes.
struggle just keeps popping up because it's never resolved somehow.
Mhm.
They're a focusing oriented way of working with that. And then this is the thing that I want to tackle on the end. Is there a focusing oriented way of working with that kind of group conflict or dynamic or difference in perspective or diversity of viewpoints or something that doesn't immediately individualize it? It doesn't immediately make it about individuals' psychology necessarily. That's a question for me, because I could imagine in a focusing group something that sometimes happens, and I know it's useful. I'm not saying it isn't useful. Sometimes what happens is people go away and they process it, for example, in dyads, and come back to the group, and everyone's body has changed. And so often what I see is then the group just goes on.
Mm.
And it still feels like, but something's left unattended to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, what is a focusing oriented way? Because if we could come up with an answer to this kind of question, I think we would have something to contribute to social movements.
Yes. Well, that's really the edge that I'm so interested in.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, it's about the understanding that we are an inner democracy, and my group loves your metaphor there, and a group democracy, and then way out into the world. And that every issue is both very personal and inter and intra and much larger than that, so that all those levels are attended to. Often it will be two people that represent the polarities, and they have individual issues, and it can be very helpful to do listening to those individual issues. And then there are social issues that need to also be, well, how do we feel about this larger issue that's being represented here? And the understanding that these individuals are not just their individual selves, they're ingredients of the casserole we're making, they're ingredients of the whole, and giving us something to stretch with.
Yeah. And that we don't need necessarily to start with those distinctions of personal, psychological, social. Maybe we just start with the experience and don't start by chopping it into those kind of different levels or different rounds, but then make sure that each so-called round is somehow addressed. The thing that I would think, I mean, for using your example, if someone has a very strong stance that they're fighting for in the group, and often it's obvious that there's this something personal there that makes it so meaningful to that person. Then if the person has a chance to work on or explore, carry forward, perhaps understand in some way the personal aspect of it, then we would want, I hope, we would want them to go back to what they were fighting for.
Mm,
Okay,
yes.
now how would
Mhm,
you fight for it? Not
mhm.
don't give up on it now. You're saying,
Right.
we've erased it because the personal part of it has somehow been
Yes, yes,
nullified or whatever. It's to keep it alive in the other realms. You want to say that?
yes, 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 yes. You know, that's so important,
Mhm.
what you're saying.
Um, the thing that what you just said reminds me of, where people, they notice it either becomes too much about the personal, too much about the news or the political. The thing that I've been thinking recently is, this term that's well known about spiritual bypass. But
Yes,
I haven't seen and would like to see the term political bypass and
yes, I like that. I like that.
psychological bypass. Sometimes those are also
Mhm.
bypasses.
Yes, yes.
And
And a
so,
focusing bypass,
yes,
right?
go focus on it.
Yes. Oh, my body changed, so everything is fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there are ways in which Jean was so aware of the embeddedness in political social contexts. But there are other ways in which focusing did become this internal thing, especially when he would say, well, you don't have to tell me what the issue is that you're working on. You can keep it inside, and that's what matters. Um, uh, and then, of course, it doesn't get expanded to how we are interaction, and what's inside is also between and conceptual.
So maybe it's possible to say that focusing isn't some kind of quietude. You don't go off in a corner and focus away something so that you don't have to speak up. Focusing instead is more like a preparation for a kind of action you can really stand behind.
Mm-hmm. And maybe focusing. I'm wondering if this is true. Focusing isn't within the individual. Focusing is an interaction with the world, even when the person is alone. And focusing is how um, how the interaction goes, not the content. So it's not just that you're preparing to take action and then you become an activist and you take action, but the action that you're taking is within the context of a focusing attitude, though I don't necessarily like that term, but the attitude of the action is an attitude of receptivity and curiosity. And I love what you said about um, if we could introduce the things that we know from focusing into political situations, it would be so different, because there's such a fundamental um, understanding that it can't be uh, polarized. It can't be me against you, or even one part of me against another part of me. The conflict can't be resolved. It has to be held. I mean, those basic understandings in focusing are so missing, I
Yeah.
think, in political circles.
Yes, and I think this is my guess. And may well be wrong, but my guess is that it's right when we have our most vehemently held opinions that it's likely that there's actually another part of us who feels quite differently.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
there's something about the strength of holding that opinion. It's so strong because we
Yes.
want to acknowledge the part of ourselves that's kind of going, but.
Right, right, right. Well, that helps me to come back to my story, which is, in the 70s when um, I was um, involved with feminist activism and also with focusing and other kinds of therapy. I was doing a workshop for a feminist women's organization, and it was in a college, and there was a large room with a lot of people, and this man walked in, and I was prepared with all of my exercises and my talk and everything, and people said, well, this man can't stay, this is a women's space. And so um, I, with my understandings of focusing, said, "Oh, this is important." And so after people talked about it a little bit, I divided the room into those who felt that he should leave and those who felt that he should stay, and had them speak of why. And then I had them reverse roles. And this man, it was so interesting. It was like he was a plant. This man just sat there. He just sat there through the whole. He didn't say a word. And so they changed roles, and then they had representatives from each group speak to each other. And it was such a dynamic, wonderful workshop, and so much came out of it. And I felt like it was this wonderful gift that the universe had given me.
That's a great example. And he just sat there and just was the provocation for the workshop.
He took it all in. I think he was fascinated.
Yeah.